when the young woman paid $20 for the rusted antique trunk at the Junkyard sale. Everyone laughed at her impulsive purchase, calling it worthless junk. But as she pried open the locked compartment hidden in the bottom, her hands trembling at what lay inside, she found yellowed envelopes addressed to her mother in her missing father's handwriting that would unravel family secrets spanning 3 decades and change her life forever. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Saturday morning flea market in Millbrook was bustling with its usual crowd of bargain hunters and antique enthusiasts. The summer heat pressed down through the open-air pavilion, making the industrial fans work overtime as they stirred the humid air around shoppers examining tables of cast-off treasures and forgotten heirlooms. Among them moved Olivia Mitchell, a 28-year-old elementary school art teacher whose auburn hair was tied back in a messy bun, her freckled skin already glistening with a light sheen of sweat despite the early hour. Unlike the serious collectors with their magnifying glasses and reference books, Olivia wandered with no particular purpose, simply enjoying the therapeutic ritual of Saturday morning treasure hunting that had become her escape from the work week. At the far end of the market, past the regular vendors with their carefully arranged displays, sat a section locals called the Junkyard, the domain of Earl Simmons, a gruff, weather-beaten man in his 70s who collected abandoned storage units and estate leftovers, selling them with minimal effort or organization. His philosophy was simple: one man's trash becomes another man's problem, and he was happy to facilitate the transfer for cash. "Morning, Earl," Olivia called, approaching his cluttered corner where items were piled with little regard for presentation or category. Kitchen appliances from the 1980s stacked beside vintage clothing, old tools mixed with children's toys. Earl grunted in acknowledgement, barely looking up from his folding chair where he sat reading a dog-eared paperback western. "Teacher lady," he replied, his customary greeting that acknowledged their repeated encounters, without the burden of using her actual name. Olivia didn't mind. There was something refreshingly honest about Earl's lack of pretense. He didn't care what she bought or why, didn't try to upsell her or make small talk. Their relationship was built on mutual understanding. She would dig through his junk, occasionally find something worth rescuing, and he would take her money with minimal interaction. Today, however, something caught her eye immediately, something different from Earl's usual collection of discarded housewares and forgotten holiday decorations. Half buried beneath a pile of outdated electronics was the unmistakable shape of an old steamer trunk, its leather corners worn and cracked, brass fittings tarnished to a dull brown. "How much for the trunk?" she asked, already moving toward it, drawn by an instinct she couldn't quite name. Earl squinted in the direction she indicated, seeming to notice the trunk for the first time. $30. Heavy as sin and taking up space. Olivia was already kneeling beside it, brushing away layers of dust to reveal intricate embossing on the leather surface. The trunk was in rough condition. One hinge was partially detached. The leather was dry and cracking in places, and a musty smell emanated from it that suggested years of neglect. But there was something about its solid construction and the care that had once gone into crafting it that spoke to her. "I'll give you 20, she countered, more out of habit than genuine bargaining interest. She would have paid the 30 without hesitation. Earl waved a dismissive hand. "Fine, take it. Came from the Henderson estate sale last month. No key, so you'll have to bust it open if it's locked." As Olivia reached for her wallet, a familiar voice called out behind her, "Don't tell me you're actually paying money for that piece of garbage." She turned to find Tyler and Megan, a couple she knew from the local historical society where she occasionally volunteered. Tyler, with his carefully curated vintage clothing and encyclopedic knowledge of antiques, considered himself something of an authority on value and authenticity. His girlfriend Megan, equally immersed in collector culture, rarely contradicted his assessments. "Seriously, Olivia," Tyler continued, approaching to examine her find with undisguised disdain. "That's not even a genuine period piece. Look at the machine stitching on the leather mass-produced in the 1940s, probably. And the water damage? It's been sitting in someone's damp basement for decades. Whatever was inside is ruined." Megan nodded in agreement. "You could find a reproduction in better condition for less at any department store. Plus, it would actually close properly." Olivia felt a flicker of doubt as she looked back at the trunk. They weren't entirely wrong. It was indeed damaged, and without seeing the inside, she couldn't be sure it wasn't waterlogged or mold-infested. For a moment, rational consideration nearly won out over impulse. "Thanks for the concern," she said finally, handing Earl a $20 bill. "But sometimes it's not about the object's market value." Tyler snorted. "Well, at least you're self-aware about wasting money. Let me know when you want to see some actual antiques worth investing in." Earl, who had observed this exchange with the detached interest of someone watching a mildly entertaining television show, finally spoke up. "You want me to help load it in your car, or are you going to stand around getting advice all day?" 20 minutes and considerable effort later, the trunk sat in the back of Olivia's modest hatchback. The weight that Earl had complained about proved to be no exaggeration. It had taken both of them, plus the reluctant assistance of a teenage boy Earl had recruited with the promise of $5, to maneuver it out of the market and into her vehicle. As she drove home, Olivia couldn't help but wonder if Tyler had been right. What had possessed her to spend $20 and considerable effort on a damaged trunk that might contain nothing but mold and mouse nests? She had always been drawn to objects with history, potential stories embedded in their worn surfaces, but this purchase felt different, almost compulsive, as if the trunk had somehow called to her. Her small craftsman bungalow on Maple Street welcomed her with familiar comfort. Inherited from her grandmother 5 years ago, the house was modestly sized but full of character original hardwood floors, built-in bookshelves, and a screened-in back porch that served as her art studio during warmer months. It was here, to the porch with its natural light and cross breeze, that she decided to examine her purchase. After another struggle to get the trunk out of her car and up the porch steps, a task that left her breathless and questioning her life choices, Olivia positioned it in the center of the room. Sweat dampened and already feeling the beginnings of muscle soreness, she sat cross-legged on the floor and really looked at her acquisition for the first time. Despite its obvious damage, there was no denying the trunk had once been an object of quality. The leather, though cracked, was thick and had been expertly applied over a solid wood frame. The brass hardware, while tarnished, was substantial and decorative without being ostentatious. Someone had valued this trunk enough to invest in craftsmanship that had outlasted decades of neglect. "Let's see what we're working with," she murmured to herself, gently testing the lid. To her surprise, it wasn't locked as Earl had warned might be the case. It lifted with a protesting creak of aged hinges, releasing a cloud of dust and the concentrated musty scent of long enclosed space. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Inside, the trunk was lined with faded blue fabric, water-stained in one corner, but otherwise intact. Her initial assessment revealed nothing extraordinary: some brittle tissue paper, an empty jewelry box with broken hinges, and what appeared to be old curtains or linens folded at the bottom. Tyler's mocking assessment seemed validated. She had indeed purchased little more than a container of forgotten household items. "Well," she sighed, lifting out the linens, "at least I can refinish the trunk itself. The hardware alone is probably worth the $20. But as she removed the last folded fabric, her fingers detected something unusual. The bottom of the trunk didn't feel quite right. The lining fabric didn't lie completely flat, and when she pressed experimentally, there was a subtle give that suggested hollowness beneath. Olivia's pulse quickened. Growing up with a mother who had devoured mystery novels by the dozens, she was well versed in the concept of hidden compartments. Could this trunk, this impulsive purchase that had earned her ridicule, actually contain a secret space? Careful now, not wanting to damage anything that might be hidden, she ran her fingers along the edges of the trunk's interior, searching for irregularities. Near the back, she found a nearly invisible seam in the fabric, and beneath it, the slight ridge of what might be a concealed panel. "Please don't be filled with spiders," she whispered, gently working her fingernails into the seam. The fabric, brittle with age, gave way easily, revealing the edge of a wooden panel beneath. It didn't budge at first, but after applying firm pressure to different spots, she felt a click and the panel shifted slightly. Heart racing now, Olivia carefully lifted the panel to reveal a shallow compartment beneath, and unlike the main trunk, this space wasn't empty. Inside lay a stack of envelopes, yellowed with age but remarkably well preserved, protected from the water damage that had affected other parts of the trunk. Beside them sat a small leather-bound book, what appeared to be a journal, and a velvet pouch drawn tight with a tarnished silver cord. With trembling hands, Olivia lifted the topmost envelope. The paper was delicate, the address written in elegant, flowing script using blue fountain pen ink that had faded to a soft turquoise over time. But it was the name on the envelope that made her blood run cold. Mrs. Olivia Mitchell, 317 Sycamore Lane, Millbrook, Massachusetts. Olivia Mitchell, her mother's name. Her mother's maiden name, in fact, before she had married and become Eleanor Harrington. And the address, her grandmother's house where her mother had grown up, just 3 streets over from Olivia's current home. "That's impossible," Olivia whispered, turning the envelope over in her hands. There was no return address, but in the upper left corner was a simple initial, R. She reached for the second envelope, then the third, flipping through the stack with increasing urgency. They were all addressed to her mother, all bearing the same initial in place of a return address. The postmarks spanned nearly 2 years, from 1988 to 1990, well before Olivia had been born. With shaking fingers, she carefully opened the first envelope, conscious of the paper's fragility. Inside was a letter written on cream-colored stationery, the same elegant handwriting flowing across the page. "My dearest Eleanor, I write this from a town whose name I cannot share. Watching the sunset paint the mountains in colors I wish I could show you. 3 months have passed since I had to leave, and each day without you feels like an eternity. I know you must be angry, confused, perhaps believing the worst of me. But please know that my departure was never about escaping you or us. It was about protecting you from dangers I brought to our door through my own mistakes. The work I became involved with goes deeper than I ever revealed. There are powerful people who believe I possess information that could destroy them. Until I can find a way to neutralize this threat, returning to you would only place you in their crosshairs as well. I dream of the day when this will all be behind us, when I can come home and explain everything. Until then, please know that every beat of my heart belongs to you. Every moment away is agony. All my love." Our Olivia sat back, her mind reeling. The letter was clearly personal, intimate, a love letter from someone who had left suddenly, mysteriously. But what connection could it possibly have to her mother? Eleanor had been married to Olivia's father, James Harrington, for over 30 years before his death from cancer 5 years ago. There had never been any mention of another significant relationship, let alone one shrouded in mystery and apparent danger. She reached for the journal, hoping it might provide context, but found it locked with a small brass clasp that resisted her attempts to open it without the proper key. The velvet pouch, however, yielded to her gentle tugging of its drawstring. Inside was a man's pocket watch, silver with an ornate engraving of a compass rose on its cover, and what appeared to be a small key, possibly for the journal. As she held these mysterious objects in her hands, questions tumbled through Olivia's mind. Who was R, and what relationship had he had with her mother? What dangerous work had forced him to disappear? And perhaps most puzzlingly, how had these intensely personal items ended up forgotten in a trunk at Earl's Junkyard sale? The sound of her phone ringing startled her out of her thoughts. It was her mother, as if summoned by the discovery. "Hi, Mom," she answered, trying to keep her voice casual despite the storm of questions brewing inside her. "Olivia, dear," came Eleanor's warm voice. "I'm just calling to confirm our dinner plans for tomorrow. Should I still bring that apple pie you love?" Olivia hesitated, looking down at the letter still in her hand. Should she mention her discovery immediately, over the phone? Or wait until they were face to face? "Actually, Mom," she said finally, "would it be possible for you to come over tonight instead? I found something today that I think you should see." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Is everything all right? You sound strange." "Everything's fine," Olivia assured her, though she was far from certain that was true. "I just found something with your name on it, and I thought you might want to see it right away." Another pause, longer this time. "I'll be there in an hour," Eleanor said, her voice carrying a note of concern that hadn't been there before. After hanging up, Olivia returned to the letters. She knew she should perhaps wait for her mother before reading more, but curiosity overpowered her sense of propriety. She opened the second letter, dated 2 months after the first. "My dearest Eleanor, your letter reached me, though how our mutual friend continues to make these exchanges possible without detection remains a mystery. I dare not question too closely. I wept when I read your words. To know you still believe in me, still wait for me, gives me strength when all else seems hopeless. You ask if what they're saying about me is true. I can only answer this: I never took a single dollar for myself. The evidence they claim to have was planted. When I discovered the extent of the corruption, the money being funneled away from those who desperately needed it, I couldn't stay silent. But I underestimated how far they would go to protect their operation and how high up the conspiracy reached. I've gathered documents that could expose everything, but releasing them now would be signing my death warrant and possibly yours as well. I need more time to find the right ally, someone powerful enough to ensure our safety when the truth comes to light. Until then, I survive on memories of you. The way sunlight catches in your hair, your laugh that starts quiet and builds like a wave, how you always smell faintly of lavender and lemon. I would trade all the justice in the world for one more day in your arms, but I cannot abandon this fight when so many vulnerable lives hang in the balance. All my love." Our Olivia read the letter twice, trying to make sense of the veiled references to corruption and danger. This was no ordinary love story. It read more like something from a political thriller. And yet the intimate details, the clear affection, suggested a deep and genuine connection that contradicted everything she thought she knew about her mother's past. The doorbell's chime startled her so badly she nearly dropped the letter. Checking her phone, she realized with shock that she had been so absorbed in her discovery that the full hour had passed without her notice. Her mother had arrived. Taking a deep breath, Olivia carefully placed the letters back in their compartment, then stood and smoothed her clothes, suddenly aware of how disheveled she must look after wrestling with the trunk and sitting on the dusty floor. She made her way to the front door, her mind racing with questions and uncertainties about how to approach this conversation. Olivia Mitchell Harrington stood on the porch, concern evident in her expression. At 63, she remained strikingly beautiful, tall and slender, with silver-streaked dark hair cut in a stylish bob, her posture as straight as when she'd taught ballet to Millbrook's children for over 30 years. There was a quiet dignity to Eleanor that had always commanded respect, a composed grace that rarely faltered. "Olivia," she said, searching her daughter's face, "what's going on? You sounded so strange on the phone." "Come in, Mom," Olivia replied, stepping aside. "It's probably easier if I show you." Eleanor followed her daughter through the house to the back porch, where the trunk sat open, its hidden compartment exposed. As they entered the room, Olivia watched her mother's face carefully, looking for any sign of recognition. It came immediately. Eleanor stopped abruptly in the doorway, her hand flying to her throat, eyes widening as they fixed on the trunk. "Where did you get that?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I bought it this morning at Earl's Junkyard sale," Olivia explained. "For $20. Mom, do you recognize it?" Eleanor moved slowly into the room, approaching the trunk as if it might suddenly spring to life. "I haven't seen this in... It must be 35 years." Her voice trembled slightly. "It belonged to my mother, your grandmother. But she gave it away before she died. Said it brought back too many painful memories." Olivia gestured to the hidden compartment. "Did you know about this? About what was inside?" Eleanor knelt beside the trunk, her movements careful, almost reverential. When she saw the stack of envelopes, she made a small, wounded sound in the back of her throat. "I thought these were gone forever," she whispered, reaching for the letters with trembling fingers. "I looked for them for years after everything happened. My mother must have hidden them here." Olivia sat down beside her mother on the floor. "Mom, who is R? Why was he writing to you like this? What happened?" Eleanor held one of the envelopes against her chest, her eyes closing briefly as if steeling herself. When she opened them again, they shone with unshed tears and a resolve that Olivia recognized, the look her mother got when facing something difficult but necessary. "His name was Robert," she said softly, "Robert Caldwell. And he was the love of my life. Before your father." The words hung in the air between them, a revelation that shifted Olivia's understanding of her mother's past like tectonic plates realigning. "But what happened?" Olivia pressed gently. "The letters talk about danger, corruption. He makes it sound like he was in hiding." Eleanor nodded slowly. "He was. Robert was an investigative journalist. In 1988, he was working on a story about corruption in the governor's office, embezzlement, bribes, misappropriation of funds meant for public housing and addiction treatment programs. He uncovered evidence that implicated not just low-level officials, but people at the highest levels of state government." She traced the edge of one envelope with her fingertip, her expression distant, lost in memories. "We had been together for almost 3 years when he found documents proving the lieutenant governor was directly involved. The night he showed them to me was the last night I saw him. The next morning, he was gone, disappeared without a word. All his notes were missing from our apartment." "The police?" Olivia asked. Eleanor's laugh was brittle. "They took a report, but I could tell they weren't taking it seriously. Later I found out the police commissioner was the lieutenant governor's brother-in-law. 3 days after Robert disappeared, a story broke in the papers accusing him of fabricating sources, accepting bribes to kill stories, and eventually stealing the very funds he claimed were being embezzled. That's what he meant in the second letter," Olivia said, "about whether what they were saying about him was true." Eleanor nodded. "For months I was followed. My phone was tapped. I was questioned repeatedly. They were looking for him, and they thought I knew where he was. But I didn't. All I had were these letters, appearing mysteriously every few weeks. Sometimes left in my mailbox with no postmark, sometimes delivered by strangers who would approach me in public places, hand me an envelope, and walk away without a word." Olivia struggled to reconcile this cloak-and-dagger story with her understanding of her mother's life. Eleanor had always seemed so conventional, a ballet teacher, a devoted wife to James Harrington, a loving mother. The idea of her as a young woman caught in the middle of a political scandal and corruption case was jarring. "What happened next?" she asked. "These letters span about 2 years. Did he ever come back?" Eleanor's expression darkened. "No, the last letter came in November 1990. After that, nothing. I waited, hoped. For years. But he never returned. Eventually, I had to accept that something had happened to him, that the people he was fighting against had finally caught up to him." "And Dad?" Where does he fit into this story? A soft, sad smile crossed Eleanor's face. I met your father in 1992. He was kind, steady, patient with a broken-hearted woman who couldn't explain why she was still grieving someone the world believed was a criminal. We became friends first, and slowly, over time, it grew into love. Not the same kind I had with Robert. Nothing could ever be that again. But a good love. A healing love. James knew about Robert, knew I had loved him deeply, and never tried to compete with a ghost. Olivia reached for her mother's hand, squeezing it gently. Did you ever find out what actually happened to Robert? Whether the accusations against him were ever disproven? Eleanor shook her head. The story eventually faded from the news. The officials he had been investigating either retired or moved on to federal positions. Life in Millbrook returned to normal. Your grandmother, who never approved of Robert, thought he was too intense. Too crusading, suggested it was time I put away childish things and move forward. Her gaze returned to the trunk. I had kept the letters in a box in my bedroom. One day, I came home and they were gone. Mom claimed she didn't know what happened to them. I was furious with her for years, even though she denied taking them. I never imagined she had hidden them in her trunk instead of destroying them. But why would Grandma hide the letters instead of just throwing them away? Olivia wondered. Because despite everything, she was my mother, Eleanor said softly. She couldn't bring herself to destroy something that mattered so much to me, even if she thought it was holding me back. Hiding them was her compromise between protecting me and respecting my feelings. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of this family history settling around them. Olivia tried to imagine her practical, somewhat stern grandmother making such a sentimental choice, preserving letters she disapproved of because she couldn't bear to destroy her daughter's treasures. Have you read all of these? Eleanor asked suddenly, gesturing to the stack. No, Olivia admitted. Just the first two. I was going to wait for you before reading more. Eleanor nodded, gathering the letters into a neat stack. Let's take these inside. Make some tea. And then I think it's time I told you the whole story of Robert Caldwell. And perhaps we should read these last letters together. I never knew what his final words to me were. As they rose to move inside, Olivia remembered the journal in the velvet pouch. Wait, Mom, there's more. A journal locked, but I think this might be the key. She retrieved the small brass key from the velvet pouch and held it up alongside the pocket watch. And this? Eleanor gasped when she saw the watch, reaching for it with reverence. His grandfather's watch, she whispered. He always carried it. Said it reminded him that truth was like a compass. It might not always lead you where you wanted to go, but it would always point in the right direction. She opened the watch case, revealing a faded photograph tucked inside, a much younger Eleanor, her dark hair falling in waves around a smiling face. Carefree in a way Olivia had rarely seen her mother look in real life. I gave him this picture the day before he disappeared, Eleanor said, her voice thick with emotion. He promised he would carry it next to his heart until we were together again. The implications of finding these items that Robert had clearly treasured and kept with him hung unspoken between them. If he had intended to return to Eleanor, why would these precious mementos be separated from him? The watch, the key, the journal, the letters. How had they all ended up hidden in Eleanor's mother's trunk? Mom, Olivia said gently, I think we need to find out what happened to Robert. These things, finding them after all these years. It feels like more than coincidence. Eleanor looked up from the photograph, a new determination hardening her features. Yes, she agreed, her voice stronger now. After 35 years, I think it's finally time to uncover the truth. Robert deserves that. And so do I. As they carefully gathered the mysterious items to take inside, Olivia reflected on how quickly life could change. This morning, she had been just an art teacher enjoying a Saturday at the flea market. Now she stood on the precipice of a decades-old mystery involving political corruption, a vanished journalist, and her mother's secret past. The trunk that Tyler and Megan had mocked as worthless had contained something beyond price, a chance for truth and closure. As she followed her mother inside, Olivia silently thanked whatever instinct had drawn her to that battered old steamer trunk, the $20 Junkyard find that was about to change everything. Inside the cozy kitchen of Olivia's craftsman bungalow, the atmosphere was charged with an energy that neither woman had anticipated for their Saturday evening. Steam rose from 2 mugs of chamomile tea as Eleanor and Olivia sat at the small wooden table, the mysterious items from the trunk arranged between them, the stack of yellowed letters, the locked journal, the antique pocket watch with its hidden photograph, and the small brass key that promised answers. Eleanor's hands trembled slightly as she reached for the 3rd letter in the chronological stack. "I never knew what happened after his last letter," she said, her voice steady despite her shaking hands. "For all these years, I've lived with questions that seemed would never be answered." Olivia watched her mother carefully, still processing the revelation of this unknown chapter in Eleanor's life. "You never tried to investigate? To find out what really happened to him?" Eleanor's smile was tinged with sadness. "I did, at first. I contacted newspapers, tried to speak with his former colleagues. But Robert had been thoroughly discredited. No one wanted to risk their reputation by associating with his case." She sighed deeply. "And there were warnings." Olivia leaned forward. "Nothing explicit. A brick through my apartment window. My car vandalized. A message left on my answering machine. Just breathing, but enough to make me understand I was being watched." Eleanor shook her head. "When I met your father, the harassment stopped. I think they believed I had moved on, no longer posed any threat to whatever secrets they were protecting." Olivia felt a chill run down her spine. The Millbrook she knew quiet, picturesque, where the biggest controversy was usually about zoning regulations for new storefronts seemed worlds away from this tale of corruption and intimidation. "Let's read on," she suggested gently. "Maybe these letters contain clues about what really happened." Eleanor nodded and carefully opened the 3rd envelope. As she unfolded the letter, a small pressed wild faded to a pale blue but still intact, fell onto the table. "My dearest Eleanor, I found this flower growing improbably between rocks on a mountain path, and thought of you immediately resilient, beautiful, thriving where others would surrender. I've pressed and enclosed it as a poor substitute for the bouquets I long to bring you. My situation has grown more complicated. The documents I gathered are more damning than I initially realized. They don't just prove embezzlement and bribery, they reveal connections to organized crime, showing how state contracts were awarded to companies with ties to known criminal enterprises. The money stolen from public housing and addiction programs wasn't merely lining politicians' pockets. It was funding a network of illegal activities across state lines. I've made contact with a federal prosecutor who may be trustworthy. He's reviewing copies of what I found and considering whether witness protection might be possible. The thought of a new identity, a life in hiding, is almost unbearable, except for the possibility that you might join me. Would you consider it, Eleanor? Leaving everything behind, your dancing, your students, your family, to start anew with me somewhere far from here? It's a terrible thing to ask, but I find I must. If you're willing, leave your answer with our mutual friend. A simple yes or no is all I need for now. If it's yes, I'll begin making arrangements. If no, I will understand completely and pursue other options that won't require such sacrifice from you. All my love." Our Eleanor pressed her fingers to her lips, eyes closed as tears slipped down her cheeks. "I said yes," she whispered after a moment. "Without hesitation. I told our mutual friend, a waitress at the diner where we used to meet, who somehow passed messages between us, that I would go anywhere, become anyone, as long as we could be together. You were willing to leave everything behind?" Olivia asked, trying to imagine her mother always so rooted, so connected to Millbrook, contemplating such a complete break with her life. In a heartbeat, Eleanor confirmed. When you truly love someone, Olivia, the way I loved Robert, nothing else compares. My life without him felt hollow, every day a performance of normalcy while inside I was screaming his name. She looked up, meeting her daughter's eyes directly. I don't want you to misunderstand. I loved your father deeply, treasured our family, never regretted the life we built together. But Robert he was the great passion, the defining love. Even James understood that. The revelation of her mother's emotional depths, this capacity for all-consuming love that Olivia had never witnessed, was almost as shocking as the mystery itself. Eleanor had always been loving but reserved, passionate about ballet and teaching, but controlled in her personal expressions of emotion. This glimpse of her mother as a young woman willing to abandon everything for love transformed Olivia's understanding of who Eleanor truly was. They continued through the letters, each revealing more about Robert's investigation and the growing danger he faced. The fourth letter described a meeting with federal agents that had gone wrong, Robert suspecting a leak within the agency itself. The fifth detailed his narrow escape from men who had tracked him to a small town in Vermont where he'd been hiding temporarily. The sixth letter, dated spring 1990, marked a shift in tone. My dearest Eleanor, I received your message through our friend, the simple still yes that sustains me through these dark days. But I must be honest with you now about the full scope of what we face. I've uncovered connections that reach far beyond state politics, implicating federal officials and exposing a conspiracy that spans decades. The corruption I initially reported on was merely the visible edge of something far more insidious. The same network that has been siphoning funds from public programs has also been facilitating money laundering for international criminal organizations. Yesterday, I narrowly avoided capture after being recognized at a bus station. I'm no longer certain who can be trusted. The federal prosecutor I mentioned has gone silent, reassigned suddenly to a remote office in Alaska, according to news reports. My journalist contacts have distanced themselves entirely, warning that my name has become toxic in the industry. I have made a difficult decision. There's a journalist in Washington, someone with the national platform and resources I lack, who might be willing to take on this story. I'm compiling everything I've gathered into a comprehensive file and will attempt to get it to him securely. If he publishes what I found, it could break the entire case open, making it too public for them to continue the cover-up. The risk is substantial. Moving these documents means exposing myself, however briefly. But I see no other path forward. If I succeed, there may finally be an end to this nightmare. If I fail, I've made arrangements to ensure my research doesn't die with me. You remain my North Star, Eleanor. Every step I take is toward a future where we can be together in the light, not hiding in shadows. All my love. The journalist in Washington, Olivia asked. Did he ever publish the story? Eleanor shook her head. Not that I ever saw. After this letter, there were only two more, increasingly desperate in tone. Robert never mentioned the Washington journalist again. They opened the seventh letter together. My dearest Eleanor, I'm writing in haste from a place I dare not name. My attempt to deliver the documents failed. The journalist was under surveillance, and I barely escaped the trap that had been set. I've been shot, though the wound is not life-threatening. A stranger, a doctor who recognized me from the news stories, but believed in my innocence, treated me in secret and has provided temporary shelter. The web around me tightens. I've destroyed most of my evidence to prevent it from falling into their hands, keeping only the most crucial documents that prove the highest level connections. These I've hidden where they can't be found unless one knows exactly where to look. I'm making one last attempt to break this open. There's a federal judge with a reputation for incorruptibility who may be willing to review what I have directly, bypassing the compromised channels I've encountered so far. If he agrees to meet me, it could change everything. If not, I must consider contingency plans. I've made arrangements to secure certain items of personal importance, things I couldn't bear to have lost or destroyed. You'll understand when the time comes. Hold fast to hope, my love. Even in these darkest hours, I believe in the possibility of justice and of return to you. All my love. Our Eleanor's hands shook visibly as she reached for the final letter in the stack. This must be the last one I ever received, she said softly. November 1990, after this silence. The envelope was different from the others, slightly larger. The paper heavier, the postmark from a town in western Massachusetts, rather than the varied locations of the previous letters. Eleanor opened it carefully, revealing several pages of closely written text. My beloved Eleanor, if you're reading this letter, it means circumstances have forced my hand. This is not a typical communication, but a safeguard I've put in place with our mutual friend. She has instructions to deliver this to you if I fail to make contact for more than 30 days. First and foremost, I love you. Every moment of every day, through all of this madness, my love for you has been the constant that kept me going. The reason to fight rather than simply disappear. Whatever happens, please know that. The federal judge agreed to meet me. Tomorrow night, I will present my evidence directly to him at a secure location. If he believes what I've shown him and the evidence is overwhelming, he has the authority to initiate a sealed federal investigation, appointing agents from outside the compromised local offices. I am cautiously optimistic, but also realistic. The risk is enormous. If they discover this meeting before it happens, or if the judge himself is not as incorruptible as his reputation suggests, I may not survive the attempt. With that in mind, I've made certain arrangements. 1. I've secured copies of the most damning evidence in a safe deposit box at First National Bank in Burlington, Vermont, under the name Richard Carpenter. The key is hidden inside my grandfather's pocket watch, a small compartment in the back that opens when you press the crown 3 times in rapid succession while the case is open. The box number and access details are encoded in my journal, which this key will open. 2. I've compiled a complete record of my investigation, my movements since disappearing, and the names of all those involved in both the crimes and the cover-up. This journal contains information that would be deadly if it fell into the wrong hands, which is why I've kept it locked and separate from my other documents. 3. Most importantly, I've made arrangements for us if I must disappear more permanently. Inside the safe deposit box is documentation for 2 new identities, enough money to start a new life, and contact information for people who can help us vanish completely. If the worst happens, our friend will give you a sign, a white rose left on your doorstep, and you'll know to go to Burlington immediately. The depth of this conspiracy has shocked even me, Eleanor. It reaches into federal agencies, judicial offices, even certain media organizations. The same people who have painted me as a criminal have been protecting a network of corruption that has stolen millions from the most vulnerable citizens and facilitated crimes that have destroyed countless lives. Tomorrow might end this nightmare, one way or another. If I succeed, I'll come for you immediately, and we can begin rebuilding our life together. If I fail but survive, I'll implement our emergency plans, and you'll receive the white rose signal. And if I fail completely, then this letter is my goodbye, my explanation, and my undying declaration of love. You deserved so much better than loving a man who brought such danger and disruption into your life. Yet selfishly, I remain grateful every day that you chose to love me despite everything. Whatever happens tomorrow, know that you gave me more happiness in our time together than most people experience in a lifetime. Forever yours, Robert. The kitchen fell silent as Eleanor finished reading. The only sound the ticking of the wall clock and the occasional distant car passing on Maple Street. The letter trembled in Eleanor's hands, a message from a ghost that had haunted her life for 3 decades. There was never a white rose, she finally said, her voice barely audible. "No signal, nothing. After this letter, nothing." Olivia reached across the table, covering her mother's hand with her own. "The watch," she said. He mentioned a hidden compartment with a key. With reverent care, Eleanor picked up the silver pocket watch, opening the case to reveal its face and the photograph tucked inside. She pressed the crown 3 times in quick succession, as instructed. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a faint click, a small panel in the back of the watch case popped open, revealing a tiny compartment and inside, a small safety deposit box key. He wasn't being metaphorical about the journal key, Olivia realized, picking up the small brass key they had found with the letters. "This opens the journal, and the watch contained the bank key." Eleanor stared at the 2 keys now lying on the table, physical links to Robert and the truth he had fought to expose. "After all these years," she whispered. "All this time thinking he had simply disappeared, perhaps been killed. And his final message was waiting for me, hidden in my mother's trunk." "We need to open the journal," Olivia said, reaching for the leather-bound book. "And then, Burlington isn't that far. We could drive there tomorrow, see if the safe deposit box still exists." Eleanor nodded slowly. "Yes. After 35 years, it's finally time to learn the truth." She picked up the small brass key and carefully inserted it into the journal's lock. It turned smoothly, the mechanism apparently well maintained despite the years. As the journal fell open, a folded newspaper clipping slipped out, yellowed with age but carefully preserved. Eleanor unfolded it with trembling fingers. It was a small obituary from a Western Massachusetts newspaper, dated December 3, 1990. "Unidentified man found deceased. The body of an unidentified male, approximately 35 to 40 years old, was discovered by hikers in the Berkshire Mountains on November 30th. Authorities report the death appears to be the result of multiple gunshot wounds. The deceased carried no identification. Anyone with information is urged to contact the state police. The investigation is ongoing." Eleanor stared at the clipping, her face draining of color. "This was just days after his meeting with the judge," she whispered. This might be." Olivia squeezed her mother's hand, offering silent support as Eleanor confronted the possibility that she was finally looking at the explanation. For Robert's disappearance, not an escape, not a new identity, but a lonely death in the mountains. His body never claimed or identified. "We don't know for sure," Olivia said gently. "Let's not jump to conclusions before we've read the journal or visited the bank." Eleanor nodded, visibly pulling herself together, the same quiet strength that had carried her through decades of uncertainty surfacing again. "You're right. After waiting this long, I won't make assumptions without all the facts." She turned her attention to the journal, opening to the first page. The journal was meticulously organized, beginning with Robert's initial suspicions about misappropriated funds, through his investigation, to the explosive evidence he had uncovered. Names, dates, amounts, all carefully documented, along with analyses of how the corruption network operated. Pages of the journal were dedicated to intricate diagrams showing connections between politicians, contractors, and suspected organized crime figures. "This is incredible," Olivia murmured as they paged through it together. He mapped out the entire conspiracy. All the evidence he mentioned in his letters, it's all documented here. Eleanor's expression grew increasingly troubled as they worked their way through the journal. "These names," she said, pointing to a page listing key figures in the conspiracy. "Some of them are still in positions of power today. This one became a federal judge. This one is a senior advisor to the current governor." The final pages of the journal shifted from investigation notes to personal contingency plans, exactly as Robert had mentioned in his last letter. There were coded instructions for accessing the safe deposit box, details about the new identities he had prepared, even a map marked with potential meeting locations if they needed to flee separately. The very last entry, dated November 28, 1990, was brief. Meeting with Judge Hamilton confirmed for tomorrow night, 10 p.m. Location secure. If successful, this nightmare ends. If not, I've done all I can to preserve the truth and protecting may it be enough. Eleanor closed the journal slowly. November 29th, she said quietly. The night he was supposed to meet the judge. And the unidentified body was found on November 30th. She looked up at Olivia, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. After all these years wondering, it seems the most obvious answer may have been the truth. He was killed before he could expose what he knew. But the safe deposit box, Olivia reminded her. He said he secured copies of his evidence there. If it still exists, then his work, his sacrifice, wouldn't have been in vain. Eleanor straightened her shoulders, a new determination visible in her posture. First thing tomorrow, we drive to Burlington. If that box is still there, we'll find it. And then we'll do what Robert couldn't, bring this evidence into the light. Olivia nodded, but a troubling thought occurred to her. Mom, some of these people are still in power. If what happened to Robert is any indication, they wouldn't hesitate to protect themselves, even now. I'm not naive, Olivia. I understand the risk. Eleanor's expression hardened in a way Olivia had never seen before. But I'm not a young ballet teacher anymore, afraid and alone. I have resources, connections through your father's law practice. And most importantly, I have you. Together, we can be smarter about how we approach this. Olivia considered this, then nodded slowly. We need to be strategic. Make copies of everything before we do anything else. Find allies we can trust completely. Eleanor reached across the table and squeezed her daughter's hand. Robert fought this battle alone, and it cost him everything. We won't make the same mistake. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of the day's discoveries and tomorrow's journey settling around them. Outside, night had fallen completely, the kitchen windows reflecting their own images back at them, mother and daughter, united by an unexpected inheritance of secrets and responsibility. It's strange, Eleanor said finally. For 35 years, I've lived with uncertainty, never knowing what truly happened to Robert. Now that I might finally learn the truth, I find myself almost afraid to face it. That's understandable, Olivia replied gently. The not knowing has been painful, but it's also been familiar. Sometimes certainty, especially painful certainty, can be harder to bear. Eleanor smiled sadly. When did you become so wise? I had a good teacher, Olivia said, returning the smile. A mother who showed me that strength isn't about never feeling pain, but about continuing to move forward despite it. Eleanor rose from her chair, gathering the letters, journal, and watch with careful hands. We should get some rest. Tomorrow will be a long day. As Olivia prepared the guest room for her mother to stay the night, she found herself reflecting on how quickly life could transform. This morning, she had been ridiculed for wasting $20 on a battered trunk. Now she and her mother stood on the threshold of uncovering a decades-old conspiracy, potentially bringing justice to a man who had sacrificed everything for the truth. The trunk sat on her back porch, its hidden compartment empty now of its secrets, but somehow still emanating an aura of significance. It had waited patiently for decades, preserving its contents until exactly the right moment, until it found its way to the one person who would recognize its true value. Olivia ran her hand along the worn leather, feeling a connection to the grandmother she had known but perhaps never truly understood, a woman who had hidden her daughter's treasures rather than destroy them, preserving a truth she herself might not have fully embraced. Thank you, she whispered to the empty trunk, to her absent grandmother, to whatever confluence of chance and fate had brought this story back into the light after so many years of darkness. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, a journey to Burlington, a confrontation with the past, and perhaps the dangerous task of exposing truths that powerful people had killed to keep hidden. But tonight, in this quiet moment, Olivia felt a profound sense of purpose unlike anything she had experienced before. The $20 Junkyard find had been no random purchase. It had been waiting for her, a legacy and a mission passed from one generation to the next, finally ready to fulfill its purpose. The morning dawned clear and crisp, a perfect autumn day in New England that belied the gravity of the journey Eleanor and Olivia were about to undertake. They set out early, Eleanor surprisingly calm given the emotional revelations of the previous evening. She sat in the passenger seat of Olivia's car, Robert's journal open on her lap, occasionally reading passages aloud as they drove north toward Burlington. "It's all so methodical," she remarked, running her finger along a page of Robert's precise handwriting. Even while running for his life, he maintained this incredible attention to detail: dates, times, account numbers, all perfectly documented. Olivia glanced over at her mother, noting how the morning light softened the lines of her face, momentarily revealing glimpses of the young woman she had been when Robert disappeared. He was a journalist to the core, she observed. Seeking truth was instinctive for him, even when that truth made him a target. Eleanor nodded, turning a page in the journal. He always said that facts were sacred things, especially when powerful people wanted them buried. He believed that systematic documentation was a form of resistance, that meticulous record-keeping could be an act of rebellion. As they crossed the state line into Vermont, the landscape opened up around them, rolling hills ablaze with autumn foliage, small towns nestled in valleys, farmland stretching toward distant mountains. It was beautiful, peaceful country that gave no hint of the darkness they were pursuing. "I've been thinking about the timeline," Olivia said as they passed a sign welcoming them to Burlington. Robert's last entry was November 28, 1990. He was meeting Judge Hamilton on the 29th. The unidentified body was found on the 30th, but his last letter to you was postmarked before all of that. "He prepared it in advance," Eleanor explained. "Set it to be delivered if something went wrong. A dead man's switch, essentially." The letter arriving was itself confirmation that something had happened to him. They fell silent as they navigated through Burlington's downtown toward First National Bank, or where First National Bank had once stood. As they pulled into a parking space across the street, they confronted their first obstacle. The building now housed Granite State Trust, a different banking institution entirely. "Do you think they'll honor a safe deposit box from a bank that no longer exists?" Olivia asked as they stared at the unfamiliar signage. Eleanor gathered her purse, her expression resolute. Only one way to find out. The interior of Granite State Trust was sleek and modern, with none of the ornate fixtures or aged wood that might have greeted Robert when he secured his box 35 years earlier. At the customer service desk, a young woman with a bright smile greeted them warmly. "Good morning. Welcome to Granite State Trust. How can I help you today?" Eleanor straightened her shoulders, her ballet teacher's posture impeccable as she addressed the young woman. "Good morning. This is somewhat unusual, but I'm trying to access a safe deposit box that was established at First National Bank in 1990. I understand your institution has taken over that location." The young woman's smile faltered slightly. "Oh, that's quite some time ago. Let me get our branch manager for you." As she disappeared into a back office, Olivia squeezed her mother's arm encouragingly. "One step at a time," she whispered. The branch manager, who emerged moments later, was a man in his 50s named Gregory Wilson, whose expression suggested he'd already been briefed on their unusual request. He invited them to a private conference room where they could discuss the matter discreetly. "So you're inquiring about a safe deposit box from First National Bank," he began once they were seated. "I should inform you that when Granite State acquired First National in 2003, we maintained their safe deposit box service, but there have been several transitions since then." "Does that mean the boxes no longer exist?" Eleanor asked, her voice steady despite the flicker of anxiety in her eyes. "Not exactly," Wilson replied. The physical boxes were transferred to our central facility in Manchester. Customers were notified and given 6 months to claim contents or transfer to new boxes here. After that period, unclaimed boxes were documented and their contents moved to our secure storage facility. And if a box wasn't claimed, Olivia pressed. Wilson hesitated. After 7 years, state law allows financial institutions to treat unclaimed safe deposit contents as abandoned property. Typically, the contents would be inventoried and transferred to the state treasurer's office. Eleanor's face paled slightly, but her voice remained composed. We have the key and documentation of the box number. Is there any way to determine if the contents were claimed or transferred? Wilson seemed to consider this request carefully. Without an official court order, I would normally say no, however. He studied Eleanor's face, seeming to register the profound emotion behind her calm exterior. Given the age of the account and unusual circumstances, I might be able to check our historical records. Do you have any documentation proving your right to access this box? Eleanor glanced at Olivia, uncertainty crossing her features for the first time. Robert's letter had mentioned the box was under the name Richard Carpenter, a pseudonym. She had no legal claim to its contents without revealing the entire complicated story. Olivia stepped in smoothly. The box belonged to my mother's fiancé, who disappeared under suspicious circumstances in 1990. We've recently discovered evidence suggesting he may have been murdered while investigating political corruption. She held up Robert's journal. We have his personal journal detailing the arrangement and the safe deposit key that was hidden inside a family heirloom. Wilson's eyes widened, professional detachment giving way to genuine surprise. That's quite a story. Do you have any official documentation, a death certificate perhaps? No, Eleanor admitted. His body was never officially identified. That's part of what we're trying to determine. The manager sat back, clearly weighing professional protocol against the human story unfolding before him. Finally, he sighed. I can check our historical records to see if Box 1372, that is the number, correct, was among those transferred to the state treasurer. That information isn't confidential. Beyond that, I'm afraid you would need a court order or to work directly with the state unclaimed property division. It wasn't everything they'd hoped for, but it was a start. Wilson excused himself to consult the bank's archives, leaving Eleanor and Olivia alone in the conference room. We should have anticipated this, Eleanor said, frustration edging her voice. Of course we couldn't simply walk in and access a box after 35 years, especially not one registered under a false name. It's still progress, Olivia reminded her. At least we'll know if the content still exists somewhere. When Wilson returned 20 minutes later, his expression had shifted from professionally neutral to genuinely intrigued. I've checked our historical records, he began, and I found something unusual about Box 1372. Eleanor leaned forward. What is it? According to our records, the annual fees for that box were paid automatically from an escrow account until 2017. The box was never reported abandoned, never transferred to state custody. He referred to his notes. In fact, there's a notation that in 2016, someone attempted to access the box but couldn't provide the proper key. Olivia and Eleanor exchanged a startled look. Someone tried to access it? Eleanor asked. Who? That information isn't recorded, Wilson replied. Just that access was denied due to improper identification and lack of the physical key. After that incident, the automatic payments stopped, and the box was flagged for potential abandonment, but... He hesitated. But what? Olivia prompted. But there's no record of the contents ever being transferred to our storage facility or to the state treasurer. According to our system, Box 1372 should still be at our central facility in Manchester, but it's marked with an unusual code I'm not familiar with. Eleanor's hand found Olivia's under the table, gripping it tightly. What does that mean, practically speaking? Wilson closed his folder. It means I need to make some calls to our central office. This is highly unusual, and I'm not authorized to provide more information without clarification from our legal department." He stood, straightening his tie. "If you'd be willing to wait, I'll see what I can find out." When Wilson left the room again, Eleanor turned to Olivia, her expression troubled. "Someone tried to access the box in 2016, she said quietly. 26 years after Robert disappeared. Who would have even known about it after all that time? Maybe someone from the original conspiracy, Olivia suggested. Or perhaps one of Robert's journalistic sources, someone who knew about his contingency plans. But why wait 26 years? And how would they know which bank, which name? Eleanor shook her head. Something doesn't add up. They sat in tense silence for nearly 30 minutes before Wilson returned, accompanied by an older woman, whose crisp suit and authoritative manner suggested a higher position in the bank's hierarchy. "Ms. Harrington, Ms. Mitchell, this is Victoria Kensington, our regional director," Wilson introduced. "She's come over from our downtown office to speak with you directly." Kensington nodded curtly as she took a seat across from them. "Mr. Wilson has briefed me on your unusual situation. Normally, I wouldn't involve myself in a branch-level inquiry, but the circumstances surrounding Box 1372 are exceptional." "How so?" Eleanor asked. Kensington folded her hands on the table. "Box 1372, registered to Richard Carpenter, is what we call a managed exception in our system. When Granite State acquired First National, certain safe deposit boxes were flagged by federal authorities with specific handling instructions." "Federal authorities?" Olivia repeated. "You mean like the FBI?" "I'm not at liberty to specify which agency," Kensington replied carefully. "But the instructions were explicit. The box was to remain undisturbed unless accessed by the registered owner with the physical key, regardless of standard abandonment protocols. The annual fees were paid through an arrangement with a third-party law firm until 2016. What happened in 2016? Eleanor asked, recalling Wilson's mention of an attempted access. Kensington consulted a file she had brought with her. An individual claiming to be acting on behalf of Richard Carpenter attempted to access the box. They had documentation, but not the physical key. Following the special instructions, access was denied. Shortly thereafter, the law firm that had been handling the annual payments notified us they would no longer be servicing the account. And the box has just sat there since then?" Olivia asked incredulously. "Our records indicate that in early 2017, federal agents came to inspect the box but did not remove its contents. They simply verified it remained secure and reapplied the special handling instructions." Kensington closed her file. "Which brings us to today. I cannot authorize access to this box without either the registered owner present with the correct key or a federal court order specifically overriding the existing instructions." Eleanor withdrew the safe deposit key from her purse and placed it on the table. "We have the key," she said simply. "What we don't have is Richard Carpenter, because he never existed. The name was an alias used by Robert Caldwell, a journalist who disappeared in 1990 while investigating political corruption. I was his fiancée. This key was left for me, hidden in a watch that I only discovered yesterday." Kensington's professional demeanor wavered slightly, genuine surprise flickering across her features before she regained her composure. "That's a compelling story, Ms. Harrington, but I'm afraid bank policy is clear. Without proper identification matching the registered name or a court order, I cannot authorize access." Eleanor's shoulders slumped slightly, the first visible sign of defeat she had shown throughout their journey. Olivia, however, wasn't ready to give up. "Miss Kensington," she said, leaning forward, "you mentioned the law firm that handled the payments until 2016. Could you tell us which firm that was?" Kensington hesitated, then apparently decided this information wasn't confidential. "Blackwell, Mercer, and Stone, based in Boston. They managed the escrow account that paid the annual fees. Olivia's heart raced as she processed this new information. A law firm had maintained Robert's safe deposit box for 26 years after his disappearance. That suggested planning, resources, and possibly allies they hadn't known about. It was another thread to pull, another potential path to the truth. "Thank you," Olivia said. "That's actually extremely helpful." Kensington nodded, then stood to signal the end of their meeting. "I'm sorry I couldn't be more accommodating. If you do obtain a court order, please contact me directly." She handed Olivia a business card before departing with Wilson. In the privacy of Olivia's car, Eleanor finally allowed her composure to crack. "So close," she whispered, her hands trembling slightly. "After all these years, to be this close and still blocked." Olivia started the engine, but didn't immediately pull away from the bank. "It's not a dead end, Mom. It's a new direction. We know the box exists. We know federal authorities have been involved. And most importantly, we know which law firm was protecting Robert's legacy all those years." "Boston," Eleanor said, straightening in her seat as her natural resilience reasserted itself. "That's our next stop, then." Blackwell, Mercer, and Stone. The drive to Boston took them south through Vermont's picturesque landscape. The beauty of the autumn foliage a stark contrast to the increasingly complex mystery they were pursuing. They used the travel time strategically, Olivia driving while Eleanor researched the law firm on her phone and made calls to contacts from her late husband's legal practice. "Blackwell, Mercer, and Stone is one of the oldest firms in Boston," Eleanor reported. "Primarily corporate law, but with a significant practice in estates and trusts. Quite prestigious. James worked opposite them on several cases over the years. Any connection to Robert that you can think of?" Olivia asked, navigating through increasingly heavy traffic as they approached the city. Eleanor shook her head. "None that I'm aware of. Robert's contacts were mainly other journalists, activists, a few sympathetic politicians. I don't recall him ever mentioning high-powered corporate attorneys. Maybe they came into the picture after his disappearance?" Olivia suggested. "Someone who believed his story, wanted to protect his evidence." "Possibly," Eleanor conceded. "But who? And why would they stop in 2016, after 26 years of maintaining the arrangement?" These questions accompanied them into Boston, where afternoon traffic slowed their progress to a crawl. By the time they located the imposing glass and granite building housing Blackwell, Mercer, and Stone in the financial district, it was nearly 4 o'clock, dangerously close to the end of the business day. The firm occupied the top 8 floors of the building, with a reception area on the 24th floor that exuded power and discretion, all polished surfaces, muted colors, and understated luxury. The young man at the reception desk regarded them with professional curiosity as they approached. "Good afternoon. Welcome to Blackwell, Mercer, and Stone. Do you have an appointment?" "No," Eleanor admitted. "But we're hoping to speak with someone about a trust account that was managed by the firm until recently. It's regarding Richard Carpenter." The receptionist's fingers hovered over his keyboard. "I don't show any current clients by that name." "Was this a former client?" "Yes," Olivia interjected. "The account would have been closed in 2016 or 2017. It involved payments to First National Bank in Burlington, later Granite State Trust." "I see." The young man's expression remained neutral. "Without an appointment, I'm not sure who would be available to discuss a closed account, especially this late in the day. Perhaps if you could tell me more about the nature of your inquiry." Eleanor took a deep breath. "It concerns Robert Caldwell, a journalist who disappeared in 1990 while investigating political corruption. Richard Carpenter was his alias. We've recently discovered that your firm maintained a safe deposit box in that name for 26 years after his disappearance. We're trying to understand why, and why the payments stopped in 2016. The receptionist's professional mask slipped momentarily, his eyes widening in genuine surprise. "One moment, please," he said, picking up his phone and turning slightly away as he spoke in hushed tones. After a brief conversation, he returned his attention to them. "Miss Josephine Blackwell will see you. Please take the elevator to the 30th floor and check in with reception there." Surprised by this immediate response from what appeared to be a senior partner, Blackwell herself, Eleanor, and Olivia exchanged a hopeful glance as they followed his directions. The 30th floor reception area was even more exclusive than the main lobby, with just one elegant desk staffed by a poised woman in her 50s who greeted them by name before they could introduce themselves. "Miss Harrington and Miss Mitchell, Miss Blackwell is expecting you in the oak room. Please follow me." She led them down a corridor lined with original artwork to a conference room paneled in rich oak, where a tall, striking woman in her 70s awaited them. Josephine Blackwell had the unmistakable aura of someone accustomed to power silver hair, cut in a precise bob, tailored charcoal suit, and penetrating blue eyes that evaluated them with immediate intelligence. "Miss Harrington, Miss Mitchell," she greeted them, her voice carrying the subtle remnants of a Boston Brahmin accent. "Please, sit down. I understand you're inquiring about Richard Carpenter, or rather, Robert Caldwell." Eleanor's surprise must have shown on her face, because Blackwell's expression softened slightly. "Yes, I'm aware of the connection. In fact, I've been waiting for someone to come asking about that account for a very long time." "You knew Robert?" Eleanor asked, hardly daring to hope. "Not personally, no." Blackwell took a seat across from them. "But I knew of his work, and more relevantly, I knew Judge Hamilton. The federal Judge Robert was meeting the night he disappeared," Olivia said, recalling the journal entry. Blackwell nodded. "William Hamilton was my mentor when I began practicing law, and later, a dear friend. In December 1990, he came to me with a rather unusual request. He needed a law firm with impeccable credentials to manage certain arrangements on behalf of a journalist who had recently been killed, arrangements that needed to remain confidential but completely above board." Eleanor's hand flew to her mouth. "Then it's true. Robert was killed that night." "I'm afraid so," Blackwell confirmed gently. "According to Judge Hamilton, Robert Caldwell met with him as planned on November 29, 1990. He presented evidence of extensive corruption involving state officials, federal agencies, and organized crime. The judge found the evidence compelling enough to initiate the process for a sealed federal investigation. But something went wrong," Olivia prompted when Blackwell paused. "Yes, after their meeting, as Robert was leaving the secure location, he was ambushed. The judge heard gunshots and called for help, but by the time assistance arrived, Robert had been shot multiple times and his attackers had fled. He died at the scene." Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, absorbing the confirmation of her worst fears. When she opened them again, they shone with unshed tears, but her voice remained steady. "Why wasn't his body ever identified? Why wasn't I notified?" "That was Judge Hamilton's decision," Blackwell explained. "He believed correctly, as later events would prove, that the conspiracy Robert had uncovered reached into law enforcement and the justice system itself. He feared that if Robert's identity became known, the evidence he had gathered would be seized and destroyed, and anyone connected to him might be in danger. So he arranged for Robert to remain unidentified," Olivia said, understanding dawning. "Yes, the judge personally secured the evidence Robert had brought to their meeting. Then he came to me, explained the situation, and asked our firm to establish a trust that would maintain the safe deposit box Robert had set up as his contingency plan. The arrangement was designed to keep Robert's evidence secure until it was safe to bring it to light." Eleanor leaned forward. "But that was 35 years ago. Why maintain the arrangement for so long? And why stop in 2016? Blackwell's expression grew somber. "The investigation Judge Hamilton initiated moved slowly, hampered by interference and obstruction at every turn. Several investigators were reassigned. One died under suspicious circumstances. Evidence disappeared from secure locations. It became clear that the corruption was even more deeply entrenched than Robert had realized. She rose and moved to a cabinet, withdrawing a file. In 2015, Judge Hamilton passed away. Before his death, he provided me with specific instructions regarding the Carpenter Trust. If no significant progress had been made in the investigation within 1 year of his death, I was to discontinue the payments protecting the safe deposit box and instead place this file in the hands of anyone who came inquiring about Robert Caldwell. With that, she placed the file on the table between them. Judge Hamilton believed that the landscape of power might have shifted enough over time to make justice possible, but only if the right person came looking. He specifically mentioned that someday Olivia Mitchell might come asking questions. Eleanor stared at the file, her hand hovering over it. "He knew about me." "Robert spoke of you," Blackwell confirmed with a gentle smile. "The judge said Robert's last thoughts were of you." With trembling fingers, Eleanor opened the file. Inside was a sealed envelope with her name handwritten on the front, a legal document detailing Judge Hamilton's sworn testimony about the night of November 29, 1990, and a small data drive. "The envelope contains a personal letter from Judge Hamilton to you," Blackwell explained. "The document is his official account of what transpired, which he updated periodically as the investigation progressed or failed to progress. And the drive contains digital copies of all the evidence Robert gathered, along with additional documentation the judge compiled over the years. This is..." Eleanor struggled to find words adequate to the moment. "It's what Robert died for," Blackwell said simply. "The truth he believed was worth protecting, even at the cost of his life. Judge Hamilton safeguarded it for 25 years. Now it's in your hands." Olivia, who had remained silent as the attorney explained, finally spoke. "In 2016, someone tried to access Robert's safe deposit box. Do you know who that was?" Blackwell's expression darkened. "Yes. After Judge Hamilton's death, certain parties became aware of the arrangements he had made. Someone within the federal investigation, someone who had been working to obstruct justice rather than serve it, attempted to obtain the contents of the box. When they failed, they began applying pressure to our firm to release the location and details of the trust. And that's when you stopped the payments," Eleanor concluded. "To protect the evidence until someone trustworthy came looking for it." "Precisely." Blackwell nodded approvingly. Judge Hamilton believed that as long as the corrupt parties were still actively searching for the evidence, it meant they remained vulnerable to exposure. His final instruction was to create this apparent abandonment of the box, while actually transferring its security to a different arrangement, one not connected to any financial institution. "Where is the evidence now?" Olivia asked. Blackwell smiled enigmatically. "That information is in the file. Judge Hamilton's letter explains everything, including his recommendations for how to proceed safely." As their extraordinary meeting concluded, Josephine Blackwell walked them personally to the elevator, keeping her voice low as they moved through the corridor. "Be careful," she advised. "Many of the individuals Robert identified have retired or passed away, but some remain in positions of significant influence. The structure of corruption he uncovered has evolved, but not disappeared." "Why help us?" Eleanor asked as they reached the elevator. "Your firm took on considerable risk maintaining this arrangement for so long." Blackwell's expression grew reflective. William Hamilton was a man of profound integrity who believed that justice, while often delayed, should never be denied. He considered Robert Caldwell one of the bravest men he'd ever encountered, someone willing to sacrifice everything for the truth. When a mentor you deeply respect asks you to safeguard such a legacy, you don't refuse. As the elevator doors opened, she added, "Besides, Miss Harrington, some fights are worth the risk, even if victory takes decades." I believe you understand that better than most." With the precious file clutched securely in Eleanor's hands, they descended toward the lobby, both women silent as they processed the revelations of the past hour. Robert had not abandoned Eleanor, had not escaped to a new identity. He had died that night in November 1990, just as she had feared in her darkest moments. But his work, his evidence, his fight for justice, all had been preserved, protected for decades by allies she had never known existed. Outside, the Boston evening was settling in, streetlights illuminating the historic city where the evidence of Robert's investigation had been, safeguarded for 35 years. As they walked toward Olivia's car, Eleanor finally opened Judge Hamilton's letter, reading the first lines aloud in the gentle glow of a street lamp. "Ms. Mitchell, if you are reading this, you have finally found the truth that Robert Caldwell sacrificed everything to protect. He spoke of you in our final meeting, of your courage, your integrity, and his unwavering love for you. His last words were a message for you. Tell Eleanor that some loves transcend time, and some truths are worth dying for. But the greatest legacy is inspiring others to continue the fight." Eleanor's voice broke as she finished reading the opening lines. Olivia put her arm around her mother's shoulders, supporting her as they stood together in the gathering darkness. Two women now entrusted with a truth that had waited patiently for 35 years to be revealed. "We'll finish what he started," Olivia promised softly. "Together." Eleanor nodded, squaring her shoulders as she carefully returned the letter to its envelope. "Yes," she agreed, her voice finding its strength again. "It's time to bring Robert's truth into the light." The $20 trunk from Earl's Junkyard sale had not just contained forgotten items, it had contained a legacy, a mission, and a truth that had refused to remain buried, waiting for exactly the right moment to emerge. As they drove away from Boston with their precious cargo, both women understood that their journey was not ending but truly beginning. The continuation of a fight for justice that had begun before Olivia was born, now passed into their hands by a man whose love and courage had transcended even death itself. 2 weeks after discovering Robert Caldwell's evidence, Eleanor and Olivia sat in the wood-paneled conference room of Bennett and Harrington, the law firm James Harrington had built before his death. The polished table before them was covered with documents, photographs, and digital printouts, the accumulated evidence of Robert's investigation, combined with Judge Hamilton's decades of supplementary documentation. Across from them sat Rebecca Winters, a former federal prosecutor who had joined Bennett and Harrington 5 years earlier, bringing her expertise in corruption cases and her reputation for uncompromising integrity. She studied a document intently, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. "This is extraordinary," she finally said, looking up at Eleanor and Olivia. "Judge Hamilton's meticulous record-keeping has preserved a case that by all rights should have died with Robert Caldwell in 1990. The evidence chain is remarkably intact." "Is it enough?" Eleanor asked, the question that had consumed her since they'd returned from Boston with the file. Rebecca removed her glasses, considering the question carefully. For a criminal prosecution of the original conspirators, many of those cases would be difficult given the passage of time, statutes of limitations on certain charges, and the fact that several key figures are deceased. She tapped a particular document. However, the organized crime connections Judge Hamilton continued to track show an ongoing pattern of corruption that extends to the present day. "That's prosecutable." Olivia leaned forward. "And the officials currently in power who were implicated in Robert's original investigation. The ones who've spent their careers climbing the ladder while this evidence remained hidden." "That's where it gets interesting," Rebecca replied. "Judge Hamilton didn't just preserve Robert's evidence. He continued the investigation himself, quietly, methodically, for 25 years. He traced how the original corruption evolved, documented how certain officials who should have been prosecuted instead received political appointments, tracked suspicious financial transactions, She picked up a specific file. This federal judge, for instance appointed in 2002, Hamilton documented how he systematically dismissed cases that might have exposed the larger conspiracy. Eleanor studied a photograph of the judge in question. Distinguished-looking man in his 70s who had built a reputation as a legal conservative with impeccable credentials. It was jarring to reconcile his public image with the detailed evidence of his corruption that Judge Hamilton had compiled over decades. "What happens next?" she asked. "How do we move forward with this?" Rebecca's expression grew serious. "Carefully. Despite the passage of time, the people implicated in these documents still wield considerable power. Before going public, we need to secure the evidence, create multiple backups, and identify the right allies within federal law enforcement, people who weren't connected to the original cover-up. And we need to protect ourselves," Olivia added, thinking of what had happened to Robert. Rebecca nodded grimly. "Yes, which is why I've already implemented the security protocols we discussed. The digital evidence has been encrypted and distributed to secure locations. The physical documents have been duplicated and stored separately. And as of yesterday, a complete copy of everything has been deposited with a trusted international journalist who will publish the full story if anything happens to any of us." The mention of an international journalist brought a sad smile to Eleanor's face. Robert would have appreciated that insurance policy one journalist, protecting another's work across decades and continents. "I've also retained private security for both of you," Rebecca continued. "Former federal agents with impeccable records. They'll maintain discreet surveillance until we've safely transferred the case to the appropriate authorities." The scale of these precautions might have seemed paranoid just weeks ago. But after reading the full extent of Judge Hamilton's documentation, including detailed accounts of suspicious deaths connected to the investigation over the years, both women understood the necessity. "How long until we can take this public?" Eleanor asked. "I have a meeting tomorrow with a contact at the Department of Justice, someone Judge Hamilton specifically mentioned in his notes as trustworthy. If that goes well, I expect we could file formal complaints and release select evidence to vetted journalists within 2 weeks." Rebecca gathered her notes. "After 35 years, we need to balance urgency with caution." As they prepared to conclude their meeting, Olivia noticed her mother staring at a particular photograph that had been included in Judge Hamilton's file, a surveillance photo taken of Robert the day before his death. In it, he was sitting on a park bench, unaware of being photographed, his expression pensive but determined. "He never got to see justice served," Eleanor said quietly, tracing the outline of his face with her fingertip. "All these years, I imagined so many scenarios that he'd been forced to disappear, that he'd started a new life somewhere, even that he'd simply chosen to leave. I never let myself fully believe he was gone." Rebecca excused herself tactfully, leaving mother and daughter alone with this moment of reckoning. Finding out he died that night in 1990. "In some ways, it's like losing him all over again," Eleanor continued. "But knowing he died fighting for what he believed in, that he never abandoned his principles or his love for me, there's a kind of peace in that certainty that I've never had before." Olivia placed her hand over her mother's. "And now we can finish what he started. Bring the truth to light. Make sure his sacrifice wasn't in vain." Eleanor nodded, carefully returning the photograph to its folder. "Yes, after 35 years, Robert will finally have his voice back. And so will I." 2 days later, Olivia found herself standing once again in Earl's Junkyard corner of the Millbrook flea market. The morning was cooler than her previous visit, autumn advancing steadily toward winter, and the crowd was thinner. Earl himself sat in his usual folding chair, seemingly unchanged, reading a different dog-eared Western paperback. "Teacher lady," he acknowledged as she approached. "Come to waste more money on junk?" "Actually," Olivia replied with a smile, "I came to thank you." Earl's bushy eyebrows rose slightly. For what? Selling you a broken trunk? For keeping it all these years? For not throwing away what seemed worthless? That trunk contained something very important to my family. Earl dog-eared his page and set the book aside, studying her with newfound interest. Found something valuable in there, did you? Yes, Olivia said simply. Something that had been waiting 35 years to be found. A glimmer of curiosity flashed in Earl's eyes. Anything I should be kicking myself for not finding before I sold it to you? Olivia laughed softly. No, nothing like that. Its value was personal. Earl nodded, seeming satisfied with this explanation. Well, good for you then. Most people just fill their houses with more useless junk. Nice when something actually matters. He picked up his book again, then paused. Where'd that trunk come from anyway? Don't usually remember, but that one was heavy enough to make an impression on my back. You said it came from the Henderson estate sale, Olivia prompted. Right. Old Lady Henderson. Lived in that big Victorian on Maple Street. Died without any family nearby, so the bank hired a service to clear the place out. Bunch of antique furniture, old lady knickknacks. He shrugged. The trunk was in the attic. Almost didn't bother hauling it down, but figured someone might want it for storage or as a coffee table or something. Olivia felt a chill of recognition. Margaret Henderson was my grandmother's best friend, she said quietly, pieces suddenly falling into place. They were close for decades. Earl merely grunted, already returning to his book, but Olivia stood frozen in realization. Her grandmother had hidden Robert's letters and journal in her own trunk, then given that trunk to her best friend when she could no longer bear having it in her house. Whether Margaret Henderson had known what the trunk contained, Olivia would never know. Both women had passed away years ago, taking their secrets with them. But somehow, through death and estate sales, through Earl's Junkyard and Olivia's impulsive purchase, the trunk had found its way back to the family it was meant for, back to Eleanor, carrying Robert's final messages and the truth he had died to protect. As Olivia walked away from Earl's cluttered corner, she spotted Tyler and Megan examining vintage glassware at another vendor's table. They looked up as she approached, Tyler's expression shifting quickly to awkward recognition. Olivia, hey, he said. Listen, about that trunk. Don't worry about it, she interrupted with a genuine smile. You weren't wrong about the trunk itself. It was in terrible condition. Found some hidden treasure inside after all. Megan asked, curiosity overcoming her usual reserve. Olivia considered how to respond, thinking of the astonishing chain of events that had unfolded from her $20 purchase. Let's just say I found something that was lost for a very long time. Something that needed to be found. Tyler seemed ready to press for details, but something in Olivia's expression made him reconsider. Instead, he offered a conciliatory smile. Well, I'm glad it worked out. Sometimes the most unexpected finds turn out to be the most meaningful. Yes, Olivia agreed, thinking of how appropriate that sentiment truly was. Sometimes what looks like junk to one person is precisely what another has been searching for their entire life. 1 week later, Eleanor stood at her kitchen window, watching dawn break over Millbrook. In a few hours, Rebecca Winters would be meeting with senior officials from the Department of Justice, accompanied by 2 respected federal agents who had been carefully vetted and were untouched by the decades-old corruption. The evidence, Robert's original documentation combined with Judge Hamilton's years of supplementary investigation, would finally enter official channels. Simultaneously, 3 major news organizations would receive packages containing selected portions of the evidence, enough to break the story publicly and ensure it couldn't be buried again. The journalists had been carefully chosen for their integrity, their resources, and their independence from the power structures implicated in the corruption. After 35 years of silence, Robert Caldwell's voice would echo across the nation by nightfall. Eleanor's phone chimed with a text from Olivia. On my way. Everything ready? She typed back a simple yes, then returned to her contemplation of the sunrise. The past 3 weeks had transformed her life in ways she was still processing. The discovery of Robert's letters and journal had reconnected her with the young woman she had been in 1990, passionate, determined, deeply in love with a man who had died fighting for truth and justice. Reading his words after all these years had awakened emotions she had carefully contained for decades. Yet Eleanor found herself not overwhelmed by grief as she might have expected, but filled with a surprising sense of purpose. The uncertainty that had haunted her for 35 years had finally been resolved. Robert hadn't abandoned her. He had died thinking of her, loving her, planning for a future they would never share. And he had left behind not just memories, but a mission, one that she and Olivia were now positioned to complete. The sound of Olivia's car in the driveway broke her reverie. Eleanor moved to the front door, watching as her daughter approached with quick, purposeful steps, looking both nervous and exhilarated. "Rebecca just called," Olivia announced as she entered. "Everything's proceeding as planned. The Justice Department officials are already in Washington waiting for her. The media contacts have all confirmed receipt of the secure delivery instructions." Eleanor nodded. "Good. And the security team?" "In position. 2 agents with the car that will take us to the safe house after the story breaks. 2 more monitoring for any unusual activity around both our homes." Such precautions had seemed melodramatic when Rebecca first suggested them. But as they had worked through the evidence, understanding the full scope of the corruption Robert had uncovered and the lengths to which certain people had gone to conceal it, Eleanor had recognized their necessity. Power threatened was power at its most dangerous. "I made coffee," Eleanor said, leading the way to the kitchen. "We have a few hours before everything starts moving. I thought we might spend it looking through some old photographs." Olivia followed her mother curiously. On the kitchen table sat a photo album she had never seen before, bound in faded blue fabric, its pages yellowed with age. "I found this in the attic last night," Eleanor explained, opening the album to reveal photos of a much younger version of herself with a handsome man. Olivia instantly recognized from Judge Hamilton's file Robert Caldwell. "You never showed me these before," Olivia said softly, examining a picture of Robert and Eleanor laughing together on what appeared to be a hiking trail, mountains visible in the background. "I couldn't bear to look at them myself for many years," Eleanor admitted. "And later, after I married your father, it seemed complicated." James knew about Robert, of course. He was extraordinarily understanding about my past. But these photos belonged to a chapter of my life I had reluctantly closed. She turned a page, revealing more snapshots of their life together, Robert at a typewriter, intensity etched on his face. The 2 of them at what appeared to be a political rally. Robert sleeping on a sofa, a newspaper draped across his chest. "He was brilliant," Eleanor said, tracing one image with her fingertip. "Driven by this incredible moral clarity about right and wrong. When he discovered the corruption he was investigating, how money meant for housing and addiction treatment was being stolen by the very officials, entrusted to administer those programs, he couldn't look away. He couldn't be pragmatic or political about it. For Robert, injustice demanded action, regardless of personal cost." Olivia studied her mother's face, seeing in it a mixture of pride, love, and lingering sadness. "He sounds a lot like you," she observed gently. Eleanor looked up in surprise. "Me, the moral clarity, the determination, the unwillingness to look away from injustice." Olivia smiled. "Why do you think I became an art teacher in a chronically underfunded public school system instead of pursuing gallery work like most of my classmates? I learned those values from you, Mom." Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "I never thought of it that way. I always believed I'd become so much more cautious after Robert died, so much more conventional." "Outwardly, maybe," Olivia acknowledged. "But the core of who you are, that never changed." You channeled it differently, teaching children to find beauty and expression in art, advocating tirelessly for arts education funding, organizing community programs for disadvantaged students. You fought injustice in your own way. Eleanor closed the photo album, her hand resting on its cover. "Robert would have liked you very much," she said softly. "Not just because you're my daughter, but because of who you are, the choices you've made, the values you embody." "I wish I could have known him," Olivia replied. "In a way, you have gotten to know him," Eleanor said. "Through his letters, his journal, his investigation. The essence of who Robert was lives in the work he left behind, his passion for truth, his commitment to justice, his unwillingness to stay silent in the face of wrongdoing." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, the first rays of morning sunlight streaming through the kitchen window, illuminating the old photo album that contained memories preserved across decades. "Are you ready for what happens next?" Olivia finally asked. "Once the story breaks, everything will change. There will be media attention, possibly testimony required in federal investigations. Your connection to Robert will become public knowledge." Eleanor took a deep breath, then nodded. "I've been ready for 35 years, though I didn't know it. All this time, I've been waiting, not consciously perhaps, but waiting nonetheless for Robert's truth to emerge, for his name to be cleared, for the real story to be told." She rose from the table, moving to the window to watch the day brightening over Millbrook, the small town where her life with Robert had begun, where she had grieved his disappearance, where she had built a new life with James, and where now, in her 60s, she was completing a circle that had remained open for 3.5 decades. "There's a kind of symmetry to it all," she said thoughtfully. "Robert's investigation began because he couldn't bear seeing vulnerable people harmed by corruption. Now his work will finally serve its purpose, exposing decades of wrongdoing, holding powerful people accountable, potentially helping countless individuals who never knew his name." She turned back to Olivia, her expression serene but determined. "And I'll be there to make sure his story is told correctly, not as a scandal or a tragedy, but as what it truly was, one person's refusal to be silent in the face of injustice, regardless of the personal cost." Olivia joined her mother at the window, putting an arm around her shoulders. Together, they watched the sunrise completing its arc over Millbrook, a new day dawning not just literally, but metaphorically as well. By sunset, Robert Caldwell's 35-year silence would end. His evidence would speak, his truth would emerge, and the powerful figures who had thought themselves untouchable would finally face accountability. And Eleanor, the young ballet teacher who had lost everything, who had rebuilt her life while carrying the weight of unanswered questions, who had found unexpected strength and purpose in her 7th decade, would at last complete the journey that had begun on a Colconfarn. Unexpected strength and purpose in her 7th decade would at last complete the journey that had begun on a compass called unexpected strength and unexpected strength, and a purpose in her 7th decade. November night in 1990, when Robert failed to return home. 6 months later, Olivia stood in her classroom at Millbrook Elementary, supervising as her 5th-grade students completed their final art projects of the school year. Their assignment had been to create pieces representing everyday heroes, people whose courage and integrity made a difference in the world, even if they weren't famous or celebrated. The classroom walls were already decorated with completed works, paintings, collages, and drawings depicting firefighters, teachers, healthcare workers, and community volunteers. But the project that had most captivated Olivia's attention sat on an easel in the corner, where 10-year-old Amelia Chun was putting final touches on a remarkable portrait. The painting showed a man sitting at a typewriter, intensity and determination evident in his face despite Amelia's still developing artistic skills. Behind him, shadows of powerful figures loomed menacingly, while light streamed from the pages emerging from his typewriter. At the bottom of the canvas, in careful letters, Amelia had written, "Robert Caldwell, journalist who died for the truth. How's it coming along, Amelia?" Olivia asked, approaching to examine the work more closely. Amelia's brush paused as she considered her painting critically. I think it's almost done. I read about him in my dad's newspaper. How he found out bad people were stealing money that was supposed to help homeless people and people with drug problems, and they killed him to keep him quiet. Olivia nodded, impressed by the young girl's understanding of a complex story. In the months since Robert's evidence had been released to the Justice Department and the media, the case had dominated national headlines. 3 federal judges had resigned. A sitting governor had been indicted. Dozens of officials, past and present, were facing charges. The corruption network Robert had uncovered had been exposed in its entirety, its evolution across 3 decades meticulously documented, thanks to Judge Hamilton's continuing investigation. My dad says he was really brave, Amelia continued, adding highlights to Robert's face. That most people would have been too scared to tell the truth when such important people wanted them to be quiet. Your dad is right, Olivia agreed. It takes exceptional courage to stand up for what's right, especially when doing so puts you in danger. Amelia's brush worked carefully on a final detail, adding a small photograph beside the typewriter, a barely discernible portrait of a young woman with dark hair. This is his girlfriend, she explained. The one who never stopped believing in him, even when everyone else thought he was a criminal. My dad says she's a hero too. Olivia felt a surge of emotion, recognizing her mother in the tiny painted figure. Yes, she said softly. She certainly is. Later that afternoon, as Olivia helped her students display their completed projects for the school's year-end art show, her phone vibrated with a text message from Eleanor. Testimony complete. Judge looks favorable. Home tomorrow. Everything we hoped for. Eleanor had spent the past 3 days in Washington, testifying before a special congressional committee investigating the systemic failures that had allowed Robert's evidence to be suppressed for so many years. It was her 3rd such appearance since the case had broken open, her calm dignity and first-hand knowledge making her a compelling witness. At 63, Eleanor Mitchell Harrington had become an unexpected public figure, the woman who had loved Robert Caldwell, who had waited 35 years for justice, who had helped bring to light one of the most significant corruption scandals in the state's history. News profiles described her as grace personified, highlighting her decades as a ballet teacher, her unwavering belief in Robert's innocence, and her eloquent testimony about the personal cost of the cover-up. What these profiles couldn't capture was the private transformation Olivia had witnessed in her mother over the past 6 months. The resolution of Robert's case hadn't erased 3 decades of grief, but it had transmuted that grief into purpose. Eleanor spoke now with a quiet authority that commanded attention in congressional hearing rooms and news interviews alike. The woman who had spent decades teaching children to express themselves through movement had found her own voice at last. As the school day ended and students departed with their artwork proudly in hand, Olivia remained in her classroom, contemplating Amelia's painting of Robert, which the girl had generously donated to the school's permanent collection. Looking at it, this child's interpretation of a complex adult story, Olivia marveled at how Robert's legacy had expanded beyond anything he could have imagined. His investigation, preserved against all odds, had not only exposed decades of corruption, but had sparked renewed interest in investigative journalism nationwide. A foundation established in his name was now funding independent reporters focusing on government accountability. Scholarships had been created for journalism students committed to public interest reporting. His story was being taught in ethics classes and journalism schools across the country. And in Millbrook, a town he had loved, where he had lived and worked and ultimately disappeared from, his memory had been reclaimed. No longer the disgraced reporter who had vanished under a cloud of suspicion, Robert Caldwell was now recognized as what he had always been, a man of principle who had sacrificed everything in pursuit of truth and justice. The rusted trunk that had preserved his legacy The $20 Junkyard find that had changed everything now sat in Eleanor's living room, carefully restored and prominently displayed. What had once been hidden was now honored. What had been forgotten was now remembered. What had been lost was now found. As Olivia prepared to leave for the day, she paused before Amelia's painting one last time, struck by the simple wisdom of the child's perspective. In the young artist's rendering, Robert's typewriter emitted light that pushed back the looming shadows, a perfect metaphor for how truth, though temporarily obscured, ultimately illuminates the darkness. She thought of her mother, testifying in Washington with quiet, unshakable conviction. She thought of Judge Hamilton, meticulously documenting evidence for decades, ensuring that justice, though delayed, would not be denied. She thought of Josephine Blackwell, honoring her mentor's wishes by protecting crucial evidence until the right moment arrived. And she thought of Robert himself, who had died believing that the truth he had uncovered would someday come to light. Each of them had played a part in this long, improbable journey toward justice, a journey that had begun with a journalist's investigation and culminated, 35 years later, with a daughter's impulsive purchase of a battered trunk that everyone else had dismissed as worthless junk. Sometimes, Olivia reflected as she switched off the classroom lights, the most profound truths emerge from the most unlikely places. Sometimes what the world mocks as foolish proves to be wise. And sometimes an old rusted trunk, purchased for $20 at a junkyard sale, contains not just forgotten letters, but a legacy of courage that can transform lives, expose corruption, and ultimately, after decades of patient waiting, bring light to what had long remained in darkness. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.